This video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. If you're interested in viewing this deck list, just click the first link in the description. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword Mars. What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, Mtg, we like magic. And today, I've got a deck for you that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and you guys have been hounding me about in the comments section ever since. Here is super budget, lowest budget in a long time, actually. Rotation proof, mono blue aggro? But seriously, mono blue aggro. And it can be done, you just have to look at things a little bit differently than you normally would. And I think that is best illustrated by the fact that the creature that we're building the deck most around isn't even a creature, because blue's gotta be weird. We're gonna play a whole play set of Riddleform to start things off. Now, Riddleform has already kind of proven itself in this format a little bit, you know? It keeps popping up in these, like, blue-red spells decks that top 8'd and top 16 early in the format. And sometimes those decks are known as blue-red Riddleform decks because the deck is, in a lot of ways, built around this card. Because it's super good. 2 mana invested. Just 2 mana on a 3/3 flyer. That's cool. And it can occasionally fix your draws. That is relevant. Now, do note, by the way, that this triggers whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Not just an instant or a sorcery like some of these cards would be, but it's the same as a prowess trigger. Anything non-creature, including other Riddle forms, which is insanely relevant. Now, Riddleform is so important that I wanted to go ahead and show it to you first. It informs the deck's card choices more than any other singular card, so I wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way. If you take nothing else from this deck tech, just know that Riddleform is very real and a dangerous card. Now, before I get into all the stuff that enables Riddleform, I should go ahead and tell you about the rest of the creatures first, because this is ostensibly an aggro deck. So, with that in mind, we're playing 14 real creatures, plus Riddleform is 18, and then plus a couple of vehicles that we're playing makes 20 creatures, which is a respectable count for an aggro deck. But keep in mind that we're also sort of a tempo deck here, so we have to play some small dudes either way, aggro or tempo. We have to play some small dudes to get in some chip damage, and preferably they should have evasion. I think nothing illustrates that point better than Slitherblade. Now, Slitherblade is not the best card in the deck. Let me just say that. So we're not going to play a full 4. We'll just go with 3 here. But in this essentially tempo deck, I do want a 1-drop, first of all. And I feel like if Slitherblade essentially translates into like a slow-rolling lightning bolt, then he's done his job. You know, if he gets through unblocked 3 times and does 3 damage to them, then 1 mana for 3 damage is a fine investment, and you forced a removal spell out of their hand at that point. So you can feel okay about that too. And, by the way, we are playing an enchantment in the deck that can give him +1/+1, you know, so you can, like, double an unblockable clock, oh my god. But like, sometimes that's relevant. Get in, you know, another few chip damage with him over the course of a couple of turns. That's not bad at all. So, I do like Slitherblade. I don't think he's incredible or anything, but he does some stuff for us in this deck, and he can crew the vehicle we're playing too. So, food for thought. Food for thought. Slitherblade is not the best thing ever, but I do think he earns his place in the deck. I'm also going to play 3 Spellweaver Eternal. This is a card that I was fairly excited to try out. I really, really like it in draft, so I was interested to see how it translates into Standard. And I never expected it to be a 4 of, and it kind of lived up to all my expectations. You know, it's not worth being a 4 of or anything, but it does put in some work. You know, you've essentially, if you just cast 1 spell on your turn, you've essentially paid 2 mana for a 3-power guy. That's not terrible. And the Afflict is sometimes important. You know, if it's already done a couple of damage and then it gets blocked on the next turn, then you essentially can do 5 damage with this in just a couple of turns. So that's really not bad. Honestly, for just 2 mana, you could do a lot worse. Spellweaver Eternal just goes with our sort of prowess or spells theme. I wanted at least one other card that worked well with the spells theme, and this is definitely one of the better ones we can play. It's only like 3 to 5 cents right now, but you could do a lot worse in the 2-drop slot. Heads up, real quick, this next card is not going to look super good, but it's actually one of the things I'm most excited to talk about, next to, like, Riddleform in this deck. So let me go ahead and show you the 4 copies of Aether Swooper. Seriously, Aether Swooper. The card is actually pretty boss, man. This usually equates to 2 mana for 2 bodies, as long as you can get to swing with at least once. And I actually like the card against some of the aggro decks in the format that play a bunch of like 1 toughness creatures. You can feel safe swinging in with your Aether Swooper, making a guy and leaving him up to block, obviously, because he's not going to be attacking. Leave him up to block. You essentially get to attack with your dudes and still leave a chump blocker behind that can kill some of their dudes if they decide to attack with them. So Aether Swooper's not bad. And we're playing multiple things in the deck that make energy, not a whole lot of stuff, but multiple things, so it's not unrealistic to get more than 1 creature off of a Swooper. And once you start getting that kind of value, the card is actually worth way more than 3 cents. For a common, the card is pretty stupid, actually. But the last actual creature in the deck, we're going to play 4 whole copies of Nimble Obstructionist. It wasn't too long ago this was a $5 card, but it slowly worked its way down to about $1.35, which is a pretty decent price for this, because it does an awful lot for us. Again, we're sort of a tempo deck, so this is a perfect card for us. It has flash, that means we can use it as removal against their dudes that are attacking in. That's pretty cool. We can just play it at the end of our opponent's turn. Think of it like a pseudo haste, you know? It's an evasive creature with a pretty decent power stat. 3 is not terrible, you know. You can just get in a couple of attacks with this. You can do 6 or 9 damage in just a few turns, and that's really, really relevant in a deck like this. And of course, you can cycle it, draw a card, and counter any number of activated or onboard or graveyard abilities that people are using, especially graveyard abilities, in this format right now. So it just has so many uses, incredibly flexible card. It can attack, it's either offense or defense. It's sort of a counter spell, it draws you cards. Just fantastic thing this is right now. So we'll play all 4 copies. I'm going to play 2 copies of Aethersphere Harvester in this deck. This is a good transition, I think, between the creatures and the spells. And Harvester, you know, copies 1 and 2 are essentially our 19th and 20th creatures in the deck. I think it's important to hit that number in a creature base when you're trying to build an aggro deck. You know, depending on the build, a lot of these, you know, aggro spells decks will only play like 12 or 14 creatures, but I want to play a couple of more than that in this deck. This is sort of our 20th creature, and it's non-creature. That's a creature that's not a creature, so when you play it, it'll make Riddleform, a 3/3 flyer. That's cool. It'll give Spellweaver Eternal a prowess hit, so that's cool, you know, and it's amazing against aggro decks. It also creates energy, so if you're not going to use it for its lifelink, you can always make another dude with Ether Swooper when Swooper swings in. It's just so many flexible things that you can do with Aethersphere Harvester, and it absolutely wrecks aggro decks that you come up against. So I think it's worth a couple of copies. Let me finish on that. I think it's worth a couple of copies, but I don't want to go too crazy with vehicles in the main deck at least, because we have like 14 creatures with which to crew this, but 14 creatures is not enough to play a bunch of vehicles. So I'm just going to keep it at 2 in the main. On the actual spells though, starting with 4 whole copies, a playset, and I stand by it, of Unsummon in the deck. Seriously. Now, Unsummon is one of those perfect tempo cards, you know. It's removal. We can just get stuff off the battlefield and then swing in with our guys, or maybe make a plan for the next turn. Just 1 mana to do that is a great deal. You know, this is yet another thing that we can sort of squeeze on top of other plays. It's nice to be able to, say on turn 3, play a 2-drop and an Unsummon. That's good tempo. There's also the trick that we can save our own guys with it. People have been doing that since 93 with Unsummon, and we're no different, you know. If our creatures are in trouble from spot removal or combat weirdness, you know, we can always unsummon them back to our own hand, play them second main phase, no problem. Or just on our next turn, whatever. 1 mana to do that is also a good deal. And we've got some cool, like, enter the battlefield stuff in this deck, things that make energy. And obviously we've got Nimble Obstructionist. We can always, like, pop that back to our hand and cycle it away if we really, really need to. Like if they've got some crazy onboard ability or some ridiculous enter the battlefield trigger. We can always just pop Obstructionist back to our hand, cycle it away, counter that thing, draw a card. Can be relevant sometimes. I'm also going to play 4 copies of Ether Meltdown in the deck. This card is just great. If nobody's told you this yet, I'm going to tell you now. Ether Meltdown is fantastic, and you sometimes see it pop up in Standard, because it is that good. This is essentially just straight up blue removal, especially against ground creatures that like can't block the majority of our guys, you know. This is just like, oh, I don't have to worry about that guy for the rest of the game for 2 mana, and I get a couple of energy for my Harvester, my Swooper, or whatever. So just fantastic deal. It's 2 mana removal at instant speed for a lot of decks, and it's non-creature. Keep that in mind for things like Riddleform too. So just a really good way to use 2 of your mana. That's all I'm going to say. This is a good card. This deck needs to draw some cards so it can keep playing spells, you know, keep getting its Riddleform every turn and all that. So with that in mind, I'm going to play 4 copies of Strategic Planning to start off the different card advantage and card selection stuff in this deck. Because there's a good bit of it, but Strategic Planning is one of my favorites, if not maybe my favorite thing that draws cards in the entire deck. Even though it doesn't technically draw cards, it's still really good card selection that can not only set off a prowess trigger or get Riddleform going, but can also draw us into something else that'll do that next turn so we can get our Riddleform again. Or if we're just trying to get Eternal relatively big, we can Strategic Planning into another spell, play it, and make him 4 power, whatever. So a lot of good uses for Strategic Planning in the deck. We've got to go through cards relatively fast if we want to make our spells themes work, and Strategic Planning is probably one of the best and cheapest ways to do that. But there's another good 2-mana way in the format of getting some cards, and I think that's Cartouche of Knowledge. Because we can put it on Slitherblade and make Slitherblade a 2-power thing that's unblockable, and we draw a card, that's cool. Or Spellweaver, you know, this is a prowess trigger for Spellweaver that can also, you know, make it a little bit bigger. The turn that we play this on Spellweaver, we can essentially fly over for 4. That's pretty sweet, but I don't think those 6 creatures are enough to get us to play like 3 or 4 copies of Cartouche, but I think 2 is warranted. Makes our dudes a little bit bigger, and sometimes you'll play it on a creature that already has flying to get a card and a boost to your PT. Ultimately, I think strategic planning is just a better 2-mana draw a card option, you know, because we're almost guaranteed to draw into another really, really good card. You know, we get 3 cards to look at and pick the best among them. So I think strategic planning is better for that, and you don't have to have a legal target. So I'm going to play all 4 plannings, but I'm still going to make room for a couple of cartouches. The card is actually pretty sweet. And one more quick thing I want to note. If you're thinking that you can just like only have a Riddleform out and cast this, it doesn't work that way. Like, as soon as you cast any spell, Riddleform's trigger will go on the stack and will resolve before the spell resolves. Yes, it will be a creature before Cartouche resolves, but as soon as you cast Cartouche, you have to pick a target, and at that point, Riddleform is not a legal target. So just keep that in mind. In the main deck, I'm just going to play 1 copy of Negate here as, you know, sort of break in case of emergency, just a silver bullet copy. There is a lot of removal in the format, yes, but I'm mostly carrying Negate in case of sweepers. Don't like sweepers at all. We're not super resilient, and we work really, really hard to get our couple of creatures out. So I don't want to lose 2 or 3 creatures in one fell swoop, because we are in trouble if that happens. And we're a little okay against sweepers regardless, because Riddleform and Aethersphere Harvester, for that matter, are both decent cards against sweepers because they don't get swept most of the time. But I want a little bit more defense, and I think a 1-of Negate is good for that. And it can also just serve as, yes, a counterspell against spot removal when you absolutely need it to. To finish off the main deck, I'm going to play 3 copies of Hieroglyphic Illumination. Now, here's the deal. You could just play Censor if you wanted to. They're like $2 a pop still. I think like $1.65 a pop, really. But that would bring the budget up just a little bit, you know, $25, $30, something like that. It's still a bearable budget. So keep that in mind. You could definitely include Censor here instead, but I like Hieroglyphic Illumination just as much in some ways. Because we're looking to play creatures and stuff on turn 2. And Censor quickly loses relevance after the early game. So in some ways, I like Hieroglyphics more. You know, we can just cycle this for 1 mana when we're looking for an answer, looking for a land. I feel like that helps us push the land count down just a little bit too, and that's important. Or sometimes, if we're just looking for straight up card advantage past turn 4 or 5, then we can definitely cast this for a couple of cards. Being able to get straight up card advantage is pretty relevant. This is the only card in the deck that just does that. Here are the lands right here. It's a pretty simple mana base. There's only a couple of actual lands. Just a bunch of islands and some deserts so we can protect from flood. Don't worry, there's another very important land in the sideboard. We'll get to that in a second. But I don't think we have to go all out with this mana base, and I also want to keep the budget relatively low, so I feel like we easily get by on this. Here's our sideboard right here, and we'll start with the 3 copies of Ceremonious Rejection, because boy, do we hate Walking Ballista. We are not a fan of that at all. Kills Eternals that don't get prowess triggers, kills Nimble Obstructionist, and just like 2 counters can kill almost anything in the deck. Slitherblade, you know, Ether Swooper. Ether Swooper's tokens can get killed by Walking Ballista. We hate Walking Ballista so much. And it's super cheap as far as the converted mana cost. That's important to point out too. We're going to run 2 more copies of Negate. We're not going to quite make a 4-of, but I will make a 3-of to protect against control decks that like to sweep our dudes. That's important. And also, I should mention at some point in the video that it protects against like straight up artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, and all that stuff too. So that's, you know, literally anything non-creature is pretty decent for just 2 mana in a counterspell right now. The 2 Open into Wonder doesn't get sided in too much, but it does occasionally get sided in mid-range matchups or matchups where we get into some form of a stalemate on turn 5 or 6, and then it's all in the top deck from there. And usually we get overtaken in those situations, but Open into Wonder is a good way to get a little bit of damage in all at one time and draw a buttload of cards to keep it going. Crook of Condemnation is in there against the graveyard strategies in the format. I've been encountering a lot of them lately, just so you know, and the other people I watch that like stream or play Magic on YouTube, I've seen them encounter a lot of graveyard strategies as well. So I think Crook of Condemnation is important to play right now, as is Scavenger Grounds. I'm just going to play 1 copy of it here, mostly so that we can have another answer for graveyard strategies, yes, but also to increase our land count because we've got some 5-drops in here. I'm going to play the 1 copy of Aethersphere Harvester, you know, to make it a 3-of against aggro mostly, but As far as those 5-drops go, Sky Sovereign and Confiscation Coup are incredible cards. Confiscation Coup is a great way to sort of, after we've set up the board a little bit on the first few turns, grab one of their dudes and really turn the tide in our favor. It's another way to use the energy we've been building up all game. Confiscation Coup was in the main deck for a long time, but I don't know that the main deck wants 5-drops. I think that's definitely a philosophy for post-board. So, with that in mind, we'll also do another 5-drop in the board, and that's Sky Sovereign, which I just think is one of the best sideboard cards in the entire format right now. It can come down against aggro and just start wrecking face in a hurry. Kills the dude as soon as you play it, and we can crew it a little bit easier than you might think in this deck. If we play a spell, Riddleform or Slitherblade can crew it. Nimble Obstructionist can crew it too. So it's not super hard to get this thing crewed, swing in, kill something else, and deal a bunch of damage to the dome all at one time. Sky Sovereign is a beast in this format right now against all the sort of low-to-the-ground aggro. Here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 56. Not too bad. I know it sounds low compared to some of the stuff that I've shown you lately, but it's only like $20. And honestly, I got it for less than $20. Market price on this was like 18 bucks when I drew it up. So you can get it for less than 20 and it'll last you forever. It's rotation proof, and there's cards in the deck that could go up in price, like Nimble Obstructionist. Something good comes out in the next set or the set after that, and the card could spike right back up there as an answer to something new. So while it's only like $1.25, $1.30, I'd probably go ahead and get my copies of it because it's a fine card. Now, one thing I really kind of want to hammer in before I get out of here is that this is, again, sort of a tempo deck, sort of an aggro deck. We're right in the middle, but we have a lot of tempo elements. And tempo decks are notoriously difficult to play. If you've never played a tempo deck, it will teach you an awful lot about how to play aggro in general, how to know when to, put your foot on the pedal and when to let off the gas, when to play defensively, when to play aggressively, how to be aware of the game situation, the board state, how many cards your opponent has in their hand, how many things they have untapped, how many lands they have untapped, their options that may be available to them. Tempo, you have to really take everything into account to make sure you're making the right decision in any play situation. So tempo is relatively difficult to play, but once you get in a few games, it gets much easier to play this deck. And I feel like the process of learning this deck teaches you a lot about how to play Magic in general. So don't be afraid of this deck, and if you don't have quite as much success as you wanted in your first 3 to 5 games, just play some more with the deck, learn a little bit more about it, because there's an awful lot of tech that goes into a tempo deck. But before we get out of here, what are we doing next time? Always an important question. Well, I want to put blue-black cycling back on the docket. It's a deck that I like. I do like the deck, so a little bit of nepotism here, but I want to give it another shot. If you want to see blue-black cycling, let me know. It's a fun deck. Or we could do another fun deck that I also want to show you. I want to show you both of these decks, so don't think that I'm biased towards one or the other. But I could also show you red-white deserts. That is also budget. It is also rotation proof, and I really like the deck, so I could show you either blue-black cycling or red-white deserts. Which one do you want? And finally, in case you didn't know, this is our first video with the new camera. So let me know how it looks to you. This is apparently 4K. There it is, right there, showing it to you. It says it's 4K. So we're coming to you in super ultra high resolution, everybody. And I really want to thank all my patrons. My patrons really put this together, man. If it weren't for you, then we'd still be recording off of a literal potato. So I really can't tell you how grateful I am for that. We finally got the visual upgrade everyone's been asking for since literally the first video we ever uploaded. So here it is. Hope you like it. If you don't, then let me know in the comment section so I can make adjustments. And while you're at it, you can like the video if you enjoyed the video. That puts me in more recommended feeds, and it means a lot to me because, digital hugs. It's cool. You can also follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev or support us on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. And if you want to continue helping the channel out, if there's more stuff you can do, just click the first link in the description. That'll let you view this whole deck list and buy it from TCG Player. But even just clicking that link helps me out. So do that if you want to, and I'll see you cats later. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.